I wish I could say the moment that shocked everyone happened in a cinematic courtroom, with mahogany benches and a teary judge. But this is America, where real drama goes down at church multipurpose rooms under fluorescent lights and Costco sheet cakes. It's a Wednesday night community conversation, which means our pastor is trying to keep the gossip from exploding on Facebook. And I'm holding a manila envelope like it's a grenade. The envelope contains 2 facts. My wife slept with her boss, and her boss is my father. If you think that felt like a conspiracy theory scribbled in red yarn on a wall, same. Somewhere between the chili cook-off and a kindergarten PTA update, I stood up, cleared my throat, and said, I didn't plan on becoming the plot twist at my own potluck, but life is stubborn. You could hear a plastic fork drop. The daycare volunteer stopped mid-high C pour. I was not going to do the standard betrayed husband monologue. Too predictable, too Lifetime movie. I was going to perform a fully American pivot, read lab results, quote privacy policies, and then pass around color copies because transparency is a form of revenge. A month earlier, if you'd said the phrase toxic love to me, I'd have said it was a pop album. Now it felt like family history, a multi-generational franchise. Betrayal wasn't just a moment in a parking lot. It was a recurring subscription in our bloodline. You think you're living a normal suburban story? Mortgage, soccer practice, Target runs. And then infidelity walks in not just as a scandal, but as a genealogical footnote. We will handle this with grace, the pastor said, which is code for please don't live stream. But the truth was already hungry. My neighbors had Ring cameras and group chats with names like Street Angels. Half the town practically jingled with push notifications. When I said the word paternity, someone gasped like I'd opened a portal. I told them I had the receipts, real receipts, pharmacy swabs, 23andMe percentages, a document labeled Alleged Father. I was narrating a conspiracy and a family reunion at the same time. If you're wondering how I discovered the boss was my father before I discovered he was sleeping with my wife, that's because this story likes to walk backward wearing heels. Weeks ago, my mother called and said she'd gotten a surprising DNA relative match. I laughed it off like any son who's confident his family is normal, which is to say delusional. In the envelope, a lab confirming my wife's pregnancy, another indicating I was not the father, and a separate consumer DNA report revealing a 50% match between me and a 60-year-old man named Gregory R. Gregory R. is also Greg, the VP of Sales, my wife's boss, and the man whose LinkedIn is a museum of hustle. He once gave me a firm handshake that felt paternal and condescending at the same time, which now scans as foreshadowing. The room vibrated with that collective American hum where empathy and schadenfreude harmonize. People in my town pretend we're above gossip the way banks pretend they're above fees. I watched their faces, curiosity, pity, righteous anger, a little thrill. My wife, let's call her Rachel because that's her actual name, stood near the dessert table, gripping a napkin so tight it looked like origami armor. Greg arrived late, crisp suit, that permanent tan you can only get from bonus retreats and moral ambiguity. He said, "This isn't the place," which is a funny sentence to say in front of a crock pot labeled Karen's Famous Beans. I said, "It's a public place and our mess is public now." I wasn't dignified. Dignity is expensive and revenge is cheaper. But I also wasn't a cartoon of myself. I didn't throw a punch or overturn the folding table. I did the most American thing. I explained. I built the narrative like a closing argument, starting at the end and carrying us back to the beginning. I said I once believed in the algorithm of happiness. House plus love plus family equals safety. I said the algorithm is a liar. Cheating is an error message in the code. Betrayal is the update that deletes your photos while claiming to improve performance. People ask what line I crossed into conspiracy, as if my brain put on a tinfoil hat the minute I saw two names match in a database. But conspiracy just means you're trying to impose a pattern on chaos. My mother confessed later that she'd known Greg when they were young, the kind of knowing that you tuck into a shoebox and shove to the back of a closet. She thought the secret would stay vintage. Secrets don't stay vintage in the age of spit kits and cloud storage. What happened next shocked everyone, I told the room, because if your life becomes a headline, you might as well own the styling. The shock wasn't that my wife had an affair, because America is fluent in infidelity. The shock was the family boomerang. The man who fathered me had been mentoring me poorly, in handshakes and performance reviews, while mentoring my wife extremely inappropriately after hours. The American dream has HOA bylaws. It did not anticipate this. I passed the lab folders to the pastor first, because we still believe in chain of custody. Then to the HOA president, because she believes everything is her jurisdiction. Then to Rachel, who wouldn't look at me. "Why here?" she whispered. "Because the whole point of our suburb is stagecraft," I wanted to answer. "Because we have rules for which way your trash bins face, but not for what to do when your life reroutes itself through the uncanny valley." I said simply, because it's where everyone who thought we were happy also eats pie. The envelopes made their way through the room like a low-tech truth virus. The quiet settled into that post-storm stillness where you can hear sirens far away. My neighbor Todd squeezed my shoulder and muttered, "This is some messed-up reality TV arc," which, for Todd, is Scripture. I knew then that I wasn't just a husband experiencing loss. I was a narrator in a culture that monetizes pain with ad breaks and calls it healing. Revenge flickered in me like a lighter, but the flame wasn't for burning down their lives. It was for lighting up the dark corners where our illusions hid. I said we'd started at the ending tonight on purpose, because now we could run the tape in reverse and you could see how a normal Tuesday becomes a conspiracy map. I promised them I'd tell it all, from the first suspicious notification to the Walgreens parking lot, to the office with the glass conference rooms where American ambition and toxic love shook hands. "Then let's hear it," the pastor said, palms open as if to receive communion. The room inhaled. I exhaled. And we walked backward into the origin story. I used to think the first sign of cheating would be lipstick on a collar, but that's because I watched the wrong era of movies. In our era, infidelity comes with red receipts and battery percentages. It started like this. Rachel switched her iMessage preview to Do Not Disturb and told me it was for focus. I believed her because I worship productivity like every other suburban pilgrim. She began staying late for quarter end, a season that in corporate America often lasts 13 months a year. The first true glitch was a Starbucks receipt, emailed to our joint account at 10:48 p.m., 2 iced Americanos and a cake pop no one in our family eats. A tiny thing. Toxic love rarely announces itself with marching band. It tiptoes in wearing athleisure and takes your favorite hoodie. I did not become a detective overnight. I became a guy who asked himself on loops, am I paranoid or paying attention? I started noticing her car parked in the same spot on Thursdays, near a WeWork that rebranded itself as Innovation Campus. If you've never staked out a WeWork at midnight, you haven't truly studied American ambition. The place glows like a secular chapel, glass walls, artisanal seltzers, motivational quotes with actionable verbs. I told myself she was hustling promotion, not betrayal, because I preferred spreadsheets to heartbreak. But betrayal doesn't care about your beliefs. It cares about your blind spots. Next glitch. Our fridge started recommending more energy drinks and protein bars on the app. That doesn't sound like evidence until you realize Rachel's default grocery list was rosé and frozen naan. The algorithm had detected new patterns before I did, which makes the algorithm my co-author. Then our neighbor saw Rachel at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning in a dress she'd promised me she'd returned. She was alone, except for the shadow of an older man reflected in a window behind her. The neighbor texted Rachel, no answer. Texted me, "You good?" which is Southern Californian for "I'm ready to be helpful or to gossip. Your call." I was not good, but I was stubborn. My family, by which I mean my mother, who raised me to keep my head down and get through, taught me to weather storms in silence. Silence was the oxygen Rachel's story needed, so I broke with my training and applied methodology to madness. I exported 3 months of credit card transactions. I sorted by Gregory's Restaurant, which, cruelly, was actually the name of a steakhouse and not a person. I built a timeline because Americans believe chronology can save us from chaos. A $74 lift at 1:17 a.m., a $19 charge for a car wash at a gas station nowhere near her office, a Venmo with a key emoji to a coworker whose Instagram insisted she never keys anyone's car, which I took as foreshadowing rather than reassurance. Somewhere in that data fog, the story tilted from suspicion to plot. I saw the first photo by accident. My phone synced our shared cloud, and a thumbnail appeared. Nothing dramatic, just Rachel laughing, a man's blurred profile in the foreground. The man wore the same cologne Greg wore at the holiday party, woodsy, trying too hard. I tapped the picture and it vanished, replaced by a gray square that said, "Item cannot be displayed." I could have gaslit myself right there, played the greatest hits. She works hard, you're tired, don't make a scene. But betrayal is like a pebble in your shoe. You can ignore it, or you can stop and deal, but you don't get to walk normally. That Tuesday, after coaching soccer and microwaving mac and cheese, I got back in my car and drove to the WeWork. The security guard wore a badge that said Ambassador, which feels like satire even when you're not unraveling. I told him I left my laptop. He waved me in with the weariness of a man who has seen too many startups fail. The glass conference rooms were mostly empty, just ring lights and ghost plans. Then I heard laughter down the hall, the kind of laughter that belongs to people who feel safe in their own secrecy. I turned a corner and saw them in a corner room, lit like a commercial. Rachel perched on a table, Greg leaning in, that easy arrogance aged executives wear like cologne. My body did that thing where it split. The outside me turned to ice while the inside me sprinted. I didn't burst in. There are times in life when your dignity becomes a scuba tank and you ration it. I took a photo, reflex, evidence, self-protection, all at once. Greg touched her wrist like he already owned the next second. She said, "We shouldn't," which is not a boundary so much as a comma. He said, "You always say that," which is the anthem of infidelity. I backed away, made it to my car, and laughed. Not happy laughter, parody laughter, the kind you hear on the blooper reel of your life. If this were a conspiracy theory I was inventing, I'd have tossed in a limousine and a briefcase. I didn't have those. I had an aging Camry and a trembling hand. But I did have one more piece of modern Americana. A Walgreens open 24 hours. I bought 2 DNA kits, one for paternity, one for the ancestry rabbit hole my mother had already nudged me toward, and a bag of gummy bears because you can't blow up your life on an empty stomach. The cashier said, "Big night?" with a smile that was either kind or oblivious, and I said, "Family project," which was the truest sentence I've ever told a stranger. At home, I Googled how to use this swab without losing your mind. Then I read the instructions. Then I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror like he might confess. The next morning, I hired a private investigator using an agency with 5 stars and a logo that looked like a hawk in sunglasses. He had a drone. Of course he did. America is a place where your neighbor's kid can film your heartbreak with better resolution than your wedding video. The PI returned 3 days later with a thumb drive and a neutral tone. "It's as you suspect." He said it like he was reading lab results. He didn't know about the other lab results waiting to intersect. I watched my wife and Greg on screen in places I recognized: parking garages, lobbies, the restaurant named after a Gregory that wasn't him. Every frame was a sermon on patterns. Everyone thinks the point of catching cheating is to catch a single act. That's the small story. The real story is the pattern, the schedules coordinated, the lies rehearsed, the calendar blocks renamed. Patterns burrow into your family and redraw the map. I wasn't seeking revenge yet. I was seeking the border where denial ends. The day the Ancestry email pinged my inbox, I almost didn't open it. You can only process so much betrayal in a week. The subject line said, "You have a new DNA match." I clicked and read the name. Gregory R. 50%. Parent, child. I closed my laptop so hard it felt like shutting a door on a burglar. When I reopened it, the data was still there like a polite apocalypse. I called my mother. She went quiet for a good 10 seconds, then said my father, my legal father, had been absent, and there had been a summer, and a boy with a Mustang who smelled like cedar and gasoline, and promises. Secrets, she said, were how people bought themselves more time. My time had run out. I stared at the PI footage again and watched the silhouette of the man who was both my wife's boss and my biological father unlock a door and hold it for her. The most American sentence I've ever thought was, "Of course he held the door while burning down the house." I didn't confront them that night. I built a timeline, printed it, added tabs. Maybe it's parody to say I made a binder, but we live in a world where binders have brought down politicians and saved franchises. When I finally showed up at that church potluck, envelope in hand, I had proof of cheating and proof of family, and the two proofs braided together like barbed wire. The conspiracy map was real, and I was ready to hang it on the wall where everyone could see. I didn't choose the church for holiness. I chose it for acoustics. Our sanctuary echoes in a way that makes even apologies sound like testimonies, and I needed the math of community. Call it revenge if you want, but what I wanted was scale. Toxic love thrives in dark little rooms and closed apps. Air it out, and it wilts. The night I walked in with the envelope, I had 3 plans. Tell the story backward so no one could look away, present evidence like a PTA treasurer, and speak in the language of my people. Plain, American, the tone we use for weather alerts and barbecue tips. When I finished part 1, yes, I labeled it in my head like a Netflix docuseries, Rachel said, "Please, we can talk at home," as if home still meant the same thing. Greg checked his watch, a gesture so on brand it could have been sponsored content. He said, "I will not be subjected to public humiliation," which would have landed better if he hadn't been rehearsing private humiliation for months. The pastor asked for kindness. I asked for truth. We compromised by bringing out more folding chairs. My mother arrived late, breathless, the way guilt hurries in. She took a seat up front, as if showing her face could reverse a lifetime of closed boxes. "I made mistakes," she said, and the congregation nodded with the gravity of people who have too. This is the part where other men tell you they lost control, that rage flooded their systems like bad wiring. My wiring did pop, but the circuit that flipped wasn't violence, it was narration. I found my sentence rhythm and wrote it. I described the WeWork smell, coffee, ambition, someone's desperation microwaved at 2 a.m. I described Greg's laugh, which had the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in a way that stuck. I described Rachel's bracelet, gold, simple, the one I bought her after we paid off the Prius, clicking against the glass table while she said, "We shouldn't, we can't," and then stayed. I said the words cheating and infidelity out loud because euphemisms coddle betrayal. I used family constantly because every action had been taken against mine. "This is grotesque," Greg said. "This is accountability," I said. I handed him a copy of the paternity report like a receipt he didn't want but needed to keep for tax purposes. He looked down, looked up, looked down again. I like to think of that as the moment he realized his management style would not save him. Rachel tried to interrupt. There were reasons, there was confusion, there was that night of the holiday party when I'd been distant, and we both knew that we were overlapping true hurts with new ones to see if we could sew something salvageable. The thread snapped. My mother spoke again, not to absolve, but to anchor. She said she had met Greg long before he was Greg, when he was just a restless boy who told big stories about the future. She said she had loved him in a way that now felt like a different species from love, more like weather. It happened to you. She had never told me because she thought protecting me meant editing her past. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice, my voice, if I'm honest, cracked on the last word. I watched Rachel watch my mother and realized we were all stuck in a loop where secrecy looked like mercy until it rotted. The HOA president asked whether this was an appropriate venue. The room laughed because sometimes parody walks in wearing a name tag. The answer was yes, because the venue of betrayal had been everywhere else. Parking garages, DMs, staff retreats, so the venue of truth could be a church with a malfunctioning mic. Someone asked the question America always asks, what now? The revenge fantasy writes itself. Destroy their reputations, sue, blast screenshots, become a martyr, bathe in the warm light of everyone's sympathy until it cools. But I didn't want to live forever as the protagonist of a cautionary tale. I wanted a life again. So I drew lines. I said I would not stay married to a person who treated our vows like a mood board. I said I would not be a son to a man who had auditioned for fatherhood and passed. I said I would choose my family going forward the way you curate your feed, intentionally, with the mute button handy. Rachel asked for a chance to make it right. Justice is not a punchline, but my answer was short. Right left the building when you invited my father in. There was no elegant way to unknot it. Cheating is arithmetic. It adds people where there should have been two and then asks you to carry the one forever. I signed separation papers a week later. The pastor offered counseling. I accepted because healing needs witnesses. I stayed in our house because uprooting the kids mid-year felt like punishing the wrong people. Greg sent a lawyerly apology note, the kind that uses if like a shield. If I caused pain, if lines were crossed, if misunderstandings occurred. I mailed it back with the paternity results and wrote on a post-it, "No more ifs." The shocking part none of us saw coming wasn't the DNA match. It was how fast the story outran us. In towns like ours, gossip is a social currency. But this wasn't just whispers. It was reach. Someone posted anonymously on a neighborhood forum. A local podcaster DM'd me. Want to talk? A streaming service producer emailed, "Your story matters." It felt obscene and inevitable. America repackages betrayal and sells it back to you with a 3-act structure. I felt like a sellout for even reading those messages. Then I remembered something. Stories are leverage. If I told it myself, on my terms, maybe I could turn the spectacle into a boundary. Rachel accused me of capitalizing on pain, as if we weren't already paying the bill. Maybe I was. Or maybe revenge had evolved, less fire and more light. I didn't hit publish that night. I sat in the quiet of a house that remembered laughter and made a pact with myself. I would not let this end make me small. I would tell it all, yes, but I would also make space for something new, the opposite of toxic love, whatever that is. The room where part 1 happened emptied out. The sheet cakes were demolished. Life, rude as ever, kept moving. I locked the church door behind me and walked into the parking lot air that smelled like damp asphalt and the truth. If you want the blueprint for my version of revenge, it's boring on paper and beautiful in practice. boundaries, documentation, and daylight. The paperwork moved like a glacier, but I learned to love glaciers, slow, heavy, inevitable. Divorce in America is a ritual of receipts and signatures, and I came prepared. Greg's company put him on temporary leave, which translated means please disappear long enough for us to pretend we care. HR called me in like I was a witness at a polite crime scene. They said words like inappropriate relationship and culture standards, and I asked whether "don't sleep with your subordinate or your son's wife" was printed in the handbook. They didn't laugh. I did, softly, because sometimes parody is the only stable ground. Rachel moved into a rental with beige carpet and too many mirrors. She tried to talk every few days, to reframe, to justify, to apologize. I listened until listening felt like self-erosion. I told her the truth, like a mantra. Cheating shatters. Infidelity multiplies. Hurt, betrayal changes the chemical makeup of a home. "We were a family," she said. "We were," I said, and the past tense was mercy and judgment at once. The shocked everyone moment grew legs. The local paper wrote a non-naming piece about a community conversation on trust. A radio host called the situation Shakespeare in the age of Wi-Fi. My mother told her book club before she told her sister. That's how information moves now, horizontally, virally, then awkwardly upward. I did something people didn't expect. I started a podcast. Not about my pain in endless loops, but about patterns, about the small ways we let secrecy wear church clothes. I called it Open Door Policy because if Greg could hold a door while burning down a life, I could hold one for strangers walking out of their shame. It wasn't noble. It was survival. Speaking turned my breath into scaffolding again. Episode 1 told the story in reverse, just like that night, from the potluck to the Walgreens to the laugh in the glass room. I used the words revenge and betrayal deliberately, because hiding them only made them grow. I said toxic love like I was labeling a bottle before I shelved it. The inbox filled with Americans who had their own conspiracies, secret second families, burner phones, lies that wouldn't die. Family, it turns out, is a fragile invention we keep having to rebuild. The part that shocked everyone the second time wasn't a new twist. It was my refusal to torch the earth. People wanted spectacle. I gave them form. I did the boring things. Therapy, Saturday pancakes, coaching my kids' team, learning how to fold laundry without turning everything into abstract art. A producer from a streaming service flew in and offered me money for rights. I thought about it for a week and said yes on one condition. I narrate. If the culture was going to eat my pain, I wanted a fork too. The check didn't heal my heart, but it paid for a summer at the beach where my kids learned to read the horizon. The first time I saw Greg after the potluck, it was in a grocery store aisle between peanut butter and jelly, which feels biblical. He looked smaller without the office around him. He started to say something, and I put up a hand like a crossing guard. "No," I said, and it wasn't rage, it was geometry. "I'm not your audience." He nodded, swallowed, left his cart, and walked out. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt done. Rachel asked if there was ever a world where we could forgive. Forgiveness, in my experience, is a door you open when you're safe on the other side. I wasn't there yet. But I told her I believed in the possibility, not because she deserved it, but because I did. The baby, yes, there is one, was born in late spring. I sent a gift, a white blanket, a note that said, "May your life be clean of our mess." Not sanctimonious, just factual. The DNA was not disputed. It couldn't be. She didn't ask me to be in the room. That, at least, was a mercy we gave each other. People kept saying, "You're handling this so well," which is American for "we expected flames." But I had learned that revenge that burns too hot scalds the hand that holds it. I let mine be cooler, slower, the kind that builds arches over charred ground. I started running again, not away from anything, toward air. I learned Saturday silence. I learned how to go to a hardware store without buying grief. I learned that family can be reassembled from friends who show up with casseroles and dads from the soccer team who say, "I've got you," and mean it. I learned I could hold two truths, that the people who broke me loved me at their capacity, and that their capacity was not enough to keep me whole. The real shock, the kind that doesn't trend, was watching my kids absorb the lesson without losing their softness. We made new rituals, board games on Tuesdays, pancakes on Fridays, questions at bedtime where you have to answer with a story instead of a sentence. We said words like betrayal and still brushed our teeth. The American dream is not a house. It's the audacity to rebuild the house after the storm and paint the door a color that makes you smile every time you see it. A year later, I stood in that same church room at another potluck, this time for a fundraiser that had nothing to do with me. The lighting was still bad. The sheet cake was still perfect. Someone asked quietly if I ever regretted going public. I said I regretted that I needed to. I said secrecy had been the weapon. Sunlight was just the countermeasure. I said if telling the story turned my life into content, at least I got to be the editor. And then I said what I wish someone had said to me on the day the first receipt didn't add up. Pay attention to your patterns, not your fears. The rest will reveal itself, one unglamorous step at a time. What happened shocked everyone, yes, but what happened next saved me. Not because I won, this wasn't a game, but because I refused to play by rules that made a mockery of love. I do not romanticize the pain. I do not pretend the betrayal is gone. I live with it like a healed fracture that aches when it rains. But I also live with mornings that taste like coffee and possibility. I live with kids who know the difference between secrets and surprises. I live with a door that is open to the right people and closed to the wrong ones. If that's not revenge, I don't know what is.